This is an ADB special session, and it's consisting of 4 amazing futurist and foresight practitioners. And yesterday, we all give a big applause to Dr. Suzanne Ross for getting the award for the most important individual contribution to enhancing future thinking in Asia and the Pacific. So may I request, as Suzanne was until a second ago on the screen, when she's coming back, maybe we can actually give her a big hand again, because she couldn't be with us, although she really tried to come here. But let's see for a moment.
Yeah, good morning, everybody from Manila.
But wait 1 second, Suzanne. Our main screen is not showing any of you in the moment. So there are about 10 people working on the problem.
Okay, so maybe while we wait, what were the main findings yesterday from the day? Where are we going with futures?
I thought we ask you difficult questions, not asking us. But we had a very excellent day yesterday, I would say. So with a lot of different inputs, and then we had breakouts. People could choose where they want to go, either the academic track or the practitioner track. So we had hands-on workshop.
Okay, great.
Add to that, like there were some questions that actually Joost led the session. Everything is double for some reason, but they were questioned by Jezreel in terms of futures of justice systems, law and order. And I think that's a question for Christina here today. Future of sustainability, that is a question for all of you. The role of personal futures in futures work. So there was lots of engagement, and at the end there was a participatory session, and people were actually asking questions, which I believe the 3 of you will respond to in your presentation. So that's just a quick update from yesterday.
Great, thank you.
So I think we see the screen again. So maybe for the sake of time and not going behind, we're going to start right away. So Suzanne will actually tell us a little bit about the amazing journey the ADB has taken in futures and foresight. And then we hear 2 stories, and I will introduce them one by one. Stories from the field, I always call it in my language, what the ADB has done in certain sectors. And then Dr. Ivana will actually tell us a little bit more about ADB's work. She has been now working for some months as a consultant in the foresight team of Dr. Suzanne. So she will then wrap up the session. We won't have time for Q&A, but hopefully you have a chance to meet these amazing colleagues in the near future, but I cannot predict the future. So with these words, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome again to Dr. Suzanne, our awardee for the most important individual contribution to future thinking.
Thank you, Joost. So everyone can see me, and they
now
can.
The screen is gone, so I cannot predict how long it takes. But...
Okay, so we are not visible yet, yeah, Christina and Samantha and I.
But as I told Dr. Suzanne already, this is only the first online presentation. We really try to focus on people who are here in the room. So
okay, so maybe while we wait, Joost, you already gave an introduction, and I'm very glad to be here together with my ADB staff colleague, Samantha Hang, who is the Director for Gender and Development.
So Dr. Suzanne, do I recall correctly that today you will expose all the country directors of ADB to some foresight methodologies?
Yes, correct. This afternoon, we'll talk about, we'll use the future triangle in our country directors forum.
So maybe I ask Dr. Ivana to say something clever.
No, but okay, so no one can hear us anymore.
Now I start speaking, they will disappear again. I'm concerned. But can you hear me? I don't want to repeat what they've been saying, what they're going to say, because I'm supposed to actually lead off their presentations. But ADB has been doing work in the area of foresight and futures for now, really significantly, like concentrated efforts been going on for, I think, 7 years. and Dr. Suzanne will tell you about that. And the way it's grown, it's simply amazing. So since I don't want to, say what they're going to say, I'm going to talk about myself. Sometimes, like I was there in 2016 when the first workshop at ADB took place. I was fortunate enough to be in Brunei when their amazing initiatives took place. And for some reason, I was there at APFN got formed. That was in Taiwan. So I can see lots of young people, and maybe you will not get my reference. I have to finish this now, sorry. You will not get my reference, but sometimes, I don't know whether you've seen that movie, Forrest Gump. Yeah. So some of you have seen it, some of you have not seen it. So in terms of that movie, it's about this clueless young man who ends up being at the right place or at the right time when certain historical events take place. So I actually feel like a Forrest Gump of Asia Pacific futures because I was there where ADB started it, Brunei, and APFN started it. And what people in these organizations have done in short 7 to 8 years is simply mind-boggling. So let's hear from them. And I'm now going to be silent. Thank you.
So, warm welcome, Dr. Suzanne Roth. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. What I can see is that the slides are projected from your side now, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. The problem is I can't move them forward now myself, so it's going to be a bit challenging. Or do you see? No, it's not moving.
Just say next and they will move it for you.
All right. Okay, good. So it's always good to be agile and adaptable. And I assume you can see my colleagues too, right? Samantha and Christina, are they both projected?
Yes, we see Samantha, we see Christina. Hello, nice to see you both.
Okay, good, good. Thank you. So I want to make sure that it's very clear that this is really a team effort. And this team is interestingly led by amazing women in ADB. So I have here with me Samantha Hang, who leads the practice on gender and development. She's the most senior person who works on gender equality and women empowerment. And then we have here Christina Pak, who is a principal counsel, and she leads the judiciary reform program. So Samantha and Christina are two colleagues who really took future thinking and foresight to the next level together with me and the team. So I want to make sure that you see this whole presentation here as a joint effort. So maybe we can go to the next slide now. I assume that not everyone in this audience here really knows the Asian Development Bank. So just to ensure everyone here is on the same page, the Asian Development Bank is the regional development bank. We have a strategic vision, which is to achieve a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia in the Pacific. And as you can see, this is very much a preferred future that we have as our strategic goal. We have a lending portfolio of around $20.5 billion a year in our member countries. You can see them all on the slide here. They span from the Caucasus to the Pacific. So very diverse, different kinds of clients. So in the last 7 years, we really thought about what are the future needs of our member countries. So if you can go to the next slide, please. And this is particularly important because ADB really invests in the future. We support our member countries to design projects today, but these projects are only effective and have actually impact in the next 10 years. So you really have to think differently and imagine how will the future in 10 years look like. And obviously our projects are there to stay for another 50 years. So you also have to be very conscious about what happens in the next 50 years, considering all kinds of mega trends. And maybe let's go to the next slide here. And when we do this, we really want to engage differently with our developing member countries. The next slide, please. And work with our clients. Next one. And these clients, the clients everywhere, of course, they are facing all kinds of new challenges. As you know, Pakistan had unbelievable floods last year. In 2021, one of our $300 million projects in Nepal was buried under a landslide. So really, really unexpected for some people, maybe for the future it's not. Weather events, extreme weather events are really taking development concepts to a next level. Next slide. However, while all of this happens, and we see, of course, shifts in energy generation, and we want to move away from coal, but while all of this happens, you're very aware that the needs of those who we serve, the beneficiaries, next one, please, next slide, really haven't changed much, especially after the COVID pandemic. So what we see is really increasing poverty and an increased cost of living. So what does it mean for us futurists? We have to think about the future. We have to design projects differently, but at the same time, we also really have to focus on key challenges today, because as you know, and you heard yesterday from Pia Cayetano, probably politicians care about today. So how do we approach this? If we can go to the next slide. And the next one, next slide. Next is, next slide, is we said we need to learn from the future. So while we learn from the past, from our past projects, project completion reports from experts, really have to understand how to look at the future differently. And this is how ADB, next slide, brought future thinking and foresight in. And maybe here is an interesting story for an organization and for all of you who are leading organizations or playing roles there. We started in 2016 with only 2 staff members attending a future thinking and foresight workshop with Joost and Sohail. And by 2018, maybe 8 staff members, 4 to 8 were involved, but we started to engage with developing member countries and use future thinking and foresight for long-term development planning, to engage in new dialogues with member countries. And then, of course, during COVID, we had a huge push. So we tried to mainstream future thinking and foresight, and by today, we've trained over 300 ADB staff members. We are applying it across teams, and we have mainstream future thinking and foresight in our innovation hub. So this is a huge achievement. And if you ask me now, if you can go to the next slide, how we've done this, we've used for ADB as an organization many future thinking and foresight tools, but probably the most powerful one was causal layered analysis. Where we worked with stakeholders, for example, in China and in ADB, to really unpack what's the litany, the official description of ADB, what's our system, what's our worldview and culture, and what's the narrative. So what we found is that stories have really changed mindsets in ADB. And I give you one powerful example. Next slide. Which describes how we are now managing knowledge today and from the future. One metaphor we developed with colleagues in China was in 2018 that ADB had knowledge on a leash. And we wanted to go to knowledge with wings to really deploy our knowledge from the present and the past and the future to serve our developing member countries and really help them tackle these very complex development challenges that are existing and that are coming with all these uncertainties. Next slide. So we embedded this practice in several different sectors, and Samantha and Christina will talk about this more in their practice. One interesting work was in the transport sector, and transport infrastructure is ADB's largest sector portfolio. There we started to work on reimagining the future of transport, and you can find all these interesting documents online. But interesting there was that we, for the first time, localized narratives. So we developed stories from the future, from different perspectives of transport users. For an infrastructure bank, this was very, to be honest, groundbreaking. If we can go to the next slide. What we did is to ensure that future thinking and foresight is embedded in overall organizational changes. We really implemented it into our innovation and knowledge management work. so that it became part of culture change, part of ADB's innovation agenda. And we are using future thinking and foresight to explore new opportunities for the bank, and of course, for the engagement with countries. If you can go to the next slide, please. To give you a very concrete example, because one is, of course, to engage on more forward-looking theoretical topics. Next slide. We also use future thinking and foresight. Next slide. For imagining our own new spaces. And this is an example here. And it's really important, I think, to create these immersive experiences so that people can see that thinking about the future actually leads to results. We did a future thinking and foresight exercise with lower level ADB staff members in 2019 and thought about reimagining a space for innovation, for future thinking, and for staff gathering. And this culminated in the design of ADB's first innovation hub, which came live. We launched this actually last week. So now it's really a symbol for the change and for an organization that is preparing for the future. Next slide. I mentioned that we are working in several countries. And again, I don't want to go into detail. There's a book about this. It's called Why Policymakers Need Future Thinking and Foresight. There are case studies there, and Ivana will talk more about the work we are doing now. We are publishing a second book with new case studies that we have, but we've basically used future thinking and foresight from applying it to new country partnership strategies in Uzbekistan, in Armenia, and Philippines. We've helped governments in Indonesia and in the Philippines to think about long-term development strategies, and we are applying it for project design to ensure our projects are future-proof. We are also building institutional capacity, for example, in Vietnam, to have more future-ready organizations as part of government. And if I may now go to the last slide and conclude, as we all prepare for the future, we really need to ensure that our organizations, is this academia or public sector or private sector, are ready for the future. And we see here that all future thinking foresight tools really help us to think about what's the real purpose, especially if we want to contribute to society. We can use these tools to create participatory approaches. It helps us to really imagine and visualize. Of course, if you do your inner journey, it's a lot about self-awareness. What role do all of us and our colleagues want to play in the future? It helps with governance because it democratizes the future. It helps to have courage. Over the weekend in Vietnam, we worked with the think tank, Ivana, Sohail, and I, and they developed a metaphor from an unconscious golden fish to a green dragon. So that really created encouragement and courage for change in the organization. Of course, you need technology. And after all, I think the most important thing that future thinking and foresight really creates is excitement. So it's imagination, excitement, and courage, that all these things we need for the future, and future thinking foresight helps us to create this kind of drive in organizations. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Sam and Christina to share their experiences. Again, there are many resources available for you from ADB, and we are looking forward to staying in touch and hopefully to see you next year at the next conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I just wanted to let Samantha know you can move your own slide. You can share your screen.
Oh,
yes.
Perfect. I will do that now.
And you already heard about Samantha. She is an advocate for gender equality, for women economic empowerment in the bank. That's how we know her. But officially, she's the director of the Gender Equality Division. So Samantha, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Can I just check that you can see my slides? Are they on your screen?
Yes, yeah, on our screen, yes.
Okay, perfect. So good morning, everybody, and thank you very much, Susan, for the handover. So I'd like to just preface by saying that I do not consider myself a qualified futurist. I'm quite a novice, but I'm a trainee and I'm part of the agenda at ADB. So what I'd like to share with you this morning is, I guess, the journey of our agenda team so far in embracing this agenda. And it really started with, I guess, looking back at Suzanne's chart, I was in, I think, around 2021 when our management team of our department got offered training. And that was in the midst of COVID when everyone was working from home. And so myself and I nominated 2 members of my team to join. And it was like a, one of those introductory trainings. And quite frankly, it was probably the most refreshing training that myself and the 2 team members had said they had. So that was the baptism to this area of work. And from that, I decided I wanted to take this on for my whole job family within the bank, because I saw it as a very useful tool for enabling our work, enabling us to think differently, but also for us to build our team. And this was also in the context of a lot of organizational change. So it was in that context, and you can see some familiar faces on the slide, that as part of our annual retreat, where we bring together all our gender specialists across the bank, and there are, when we bring them all together, it's like over 50 people across all our offices. We dedicated one day for building the capacity of the group in sort of a speed training on futures thinking and approaches. So why did we do this? I guess it's maybe also to explain what our job is. So as Susan said, you've heard the broad organizational mandate, but the gender equality team is mandated to ensure that all that ADB does across our public sector, private sector interventions, irrespective of the sector and country, maximizes opportunities to advance gender equality through our work. So that's quite a huge mandate in any given time, but particularly in the time of the global pandemic, where we were seeing a lot of lost progress on gender equality. We were seeing increasing levels of violent, gender-based violence. We were seeing a huge increase on the care burden on women in the region. We were seeing growing fundamentalism in some areas and lots of losses of jobs. So it made it was even more daunting. So because it was more daunting, it was a really opportune time to sort of bring in some fresh ideas of how we could do things differently and give people more tools to really step back and think about, okay, why are we reimagining our mandate? What is our motivation and what is our vision? And I also saw it as a really important tool for us to build our team, because we're all extremely busy people. We're very bogged down into our day-to-day work. And, by nature, as gender specialists, your technical expertise is what brings you to the job. But the job is also very much one that requires strong negotiation skills, strong advocacy skills, making a business case, always trying to be ahead of the curve of why does a transport project, for example, need to think about gender equality? Why does a climate project need to think about gender equality? And so we needed to build ourselves as a more cohesive team so that we are also singing the same message. We are maximizing the sort of influence in numbers, and we're all going in the same direction, which is not really easy. But that's why I saw that as a real side benefit of taking this on. Because at the end of the day, when we're thinking about gender equality and everybody at ADB, at the end of the day, our purpose is about a more reimagining a more gender equal world for future generations, and having the tools to enable us to do that. And I always like to throw in pictures of my kids. So this is a very old picture of my kids, probably 15 years ago. But for me personally, this is why I do the work I do. And so I see this whole area of capacity as something that enables us to reconnect with why we are really doing this work. So what did we do? We had a day with Sahel and Ivana. And again, we started with Ivana giving an amazing, very inspirational talk about deconstructing our history, looking at a 200-year present in terms of where did our current state in terms of gender equality come from, and reminding us that this was always a very gendered state and that patriarchy reinvents itself in different shapes and forms. And I think when you're dealing with also gender specialists that are coming from all different backgrounds, irrespective of culture, background, country, religion, patriarchy is there, and it just takes different shapes and forms. And I think it was really important for people to be able to have that visual historical perspective on it to bring us all onto this page on why we're doing this. And these are the layers of the different tools that were introduced. And I think, as Susan said, probably the CLA was the one that resonated most. But I think also backcasting and visioning was very useful. And because it was team building, we also asked Ivana to help us apply a kind of a futures approach to a session on how do we actually address conflict, you know, and sort of embracing that there is conflict. There's always going to be conflict, whether it's with who we deal with or even within a team, and how can we apply these approaches. Interestingly, through this process, it was also about looking at introspectively, looking at our own organization. So, I mean, you can't walk the talk, and you can't do that operationally without self-reflecting. So ADB also has an organization that's changed a lot over the years. We have a lot more women in senior positions than we did before. We also have targets around that. But I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we didn't admit that we are still an organization that does have all these things that you see. You know, there are pockets of toxic masculinity. It's still a patriarchal organization in some ways. So we had to also acknowledge what we and own what we do within the organization, as well as what we do externally. So what happened at the end of all of this? And these are just some pictures from the different exercises we did. I mean, people had a lot of fun. And I think the feedback was really excellent in terms of setting an example for other teams that may want to do this. But this is, I guess, the summary of some of the vision that came out of it. And you can see that it was a vision that was very much looking at internally as well as externally. So, you know, we talk, the ADB calls itself the Climate Bank because that's a really important agenda for us in the region. But equally important, we felt, was, you know, why aren't we calling ourselves a gender bank, and what would a gender bank mean? And we see that as one where, you know, you would for the first time, you'd have a female president, and that would be normalized. You'd have an equal representation at all levels, and gender equality would really be in the driver's seat about what we're doing. So rather than a mainstreaming approach, it is the reason why we're doing it. And then we thought about in terms of the things we want to see in society. And these things came out of a lot of the exercises. I won't go into all of those, you can see them there, but maybe to just sort of share where we've gone since. I mean, it's obviously work in progress, but I really feel that this introducing these kinds of ideas has helped with people to be a bit more creative, to think a bit more outside of the box. And you know, we're still, you know, we've got to keep building on this, but some ideas where people were saying that they would like to introduce similar kinds of ideas into the capacity building that they do at country level with gender specialists that work on in government implementing and executing agencies, for example. We've tested it a little bit in a gender and climate technical assistance workshop with 3 countries. So we introduced some exercises, and that was a little bit experimental, but it was good to try. And I guess in terms of where we're going forward, we got ideas of how we can take forward some of the things that Susan is doing. And we actually haven't talked about this yet, but I was thinking, Susan, for this new innovation hub that you've got down there and the idea of experiential, one new area of work, which in a way is thinking ahead, although we're facing it, is how do we really bring attention within the whole climate space about the impacts of heat stress, on the different gendered impacts of heat stress. And we have a new project that's just been approved to really look at that issue because it's quite a new one. And we were thinking, Susan, that maybe we could think about using the Innovation Hub to bring in some experiential learning about what it feels like to be a woman working in a garment factory under heat, or a woman that's in a heat stove in a very confined environment. So those are just some ideas, but I don't want to take up too much time. And I would like to hand over to my colleague now, Christina, who's also taking forward a very important gender-related issue as well in her work. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I'm not sure if I should I share my slides or, okay, excellent. Just give me 1 second, please.
We can see the slides, Christina, great.
Awesome. Well, first of all, hello to everyone, and thank you to the organizers, especially International Islamic University of Malaysia and the Ministry of Higher Education, And it's really a privilege for me to be part of this Asia Pacific Futures Network. I'm a newcomer to the futures thinking. However, thanks to Susan, I have the work that I do in the justice sector. We've been able to take advantage of this new tool in our work. So, also thanks to Susan, because Futures and Thinking, this tool is very much in demand. But in my area of work, we've been able to take advantage of it. So my talk will basically focus on ADB's experience in applying futures and thinking in the legal and justice sector. Basically, ADB, we've been investing in building the legal infrastructure, as well as strengthening the legal and justice institutions due to their critical role in inclusive and sustainable development. And through our law and policy reform program, we have been working with governments, and many of them involve the legal stakeholders, such as the Ministry of Justice, in helping to draft laws to help with their reforms, as well as building the capacity. So one critical partner in a country's development is the Ministry of Justice. They're basically at the forefront of the country's development trajectory. So basically, as one of the first interventions in the justice sector, we've conducted a futures foresight workshop with the Armenia Ministry of Justice. And Ministry of Justice, just generally, they face huge challenges. They have basically, they have to keep up with emerging issues. They have a lot of institutional constraints as well, in terms of capacity constraints, also leadership changes, and also people that are resistant to change in terms of moving the reforms forward. So the Ministry of Justice of Armenia really wanted to find ways to better strategize in their reform efforts, as well as work with the multiple stakeholders that they need to bring on board to progress the reforms. So these are some of the, I guess, initial questions that we went through with the Armenian Ministry of Justice, really to ask the question whether they are, ready. They are ready for, how do they best prepare for the future, and basically, what is their role in preparing for the future of Armenia? So, and then we also talked about the different strategies. So we basically, the tools that were employed were very useful in figuring out the answers to these questions. So one of the key question was, how can the Ministry of Justice be futures ready? And we used the futures triangle to really, I guess, identify the different, issues that are weighing, that may have an impact on the reforms, and then what are the current issues, and then what are some of the signals from the future. And for example, a lot of the in the example of digitalization. So one of the key initiatives that the ministry was interested in progressing was digitalization and promoting e-justice. And just speaking with the various multiple stakeholders, one of the the weights of the past is that people just don't want to change, and there weren't procedural regulations supporting this change, and also the IT capabilities were pretty limited. But then there was all these, pushes from the present. There were digital governance happening in other parts of the world, in other parts of the countries. Citizens were complaining that things weren't moving fast. Businesses are complaining as well. And basically, there was a shift with this new reform agenda for governments to basically promote digitalization, e-justice. And in speaking with the participants, there were, they were in looking to the future, they saw a lot of benefits. Basically, they saw that, by putting in place digitalization and e-justice reforms, it would lead to more trust in society, more investment, attraction of investment, better reputation, of course, time saving. So this was a useful tool. And then the next tool we also employed with the Ministry of Justice was really to map out the emerging issues, and then related to those emerging issues, what are some of the, the first, second, and third consequences. So really consequences that people would not have thought of. And in particular, with respect to the digitalization and e-justice, they saw that, one of the emerging issues that private sector may just leave, they may lose business, but at the same time, there could be more opportunities in terms of attracting more IT competitors. But then there were cyber attacks, and then they just saw that there's not enough talent to enable the digitalization. But then looking ahead, what do these emerging issues, what kind of consequences could they bring? And they saw that there could be problems with governments having issues dealing with privacy and security risk. But then on the bright side, they saw that this could lead to efficiency, with courts having more time, which would lead to fairer and more quality decisions, and people would be more satisfied. And then we went through the 4 different scenarios, with this particular issue, in terms of no change, and basically no change meant that people are just stuck in the Stone Age, and then people with greater digitalization, with some marginal change, they saw some movement, and then with great change, with adaptive change, people saw just more better reform efforts. But then with radical change, they did future where AIs could take over, but then they also saw a benefit that people would have more time, and it would lead to more efficiency. Although judges would still remain, but they would actually have this tool to make better, more quality decisions. And I think the scenario analysis really helped basically form a preferred common vision with all the various stakeholders of the Ministry of Justice. And they came up with this common vision. You'll see here that it is, I guess the benefit of this common vision is that it really brought in all the various perspectives. People from various departments of the MOJ were able to troubleshoot and think through all the different issues, consequences, to come up with a preferred future that were very participatory and informed. And then one of the key benefits I think the Ministry of Justice saw was that, yes, we have these visions, but then how do we get there? And one of the key strategies that they really enjoyed was backcasting. And backcasting was very, they really liked it because it wasn't just, something that was not tenable, but it was actually plausible to get there through a detailed plans, strategies, different capacity building activities, different actions that kind of led to the preferred future. So really working backwards and thinking of the various steps. So they found that exercise very, very useful. And the outcome was really the futures foresight tools were used to inform the strategic planning of the Ministry of Justice, and also it informed their knowledge management needs as well as their institutional capacity building. And I just want to highlight 2 other interventions we had recently. And this example basically goes to establishing a new institution. So within the ADB, we also support new justice institutions. And this is an example of establishing a new international court in Uzbekistan. And it's a new thing, so there was a lot of resistance from the various stakeholders. So Futures and Foresight was an effective tool to bring the stakeholders together to get to achieve alignment, some sort of an agreement, a shared vision that actually move the process along. And basically, we looked at the Uzbekistan legal system overall before getting into what the preferred vision of this new international commercial court would be. So the participants basically went through what a legal system in Uzbekistan looks like. And then from that, we drew down to what they see as the common vision of this new commercial court, which really helped drive the process, including people that were resistant to change. And then lastly, we also talked about the risks and resources and relationships to support the development of this new institution. So the outcome of this exercise was really, it helped move the different stakeholders forward and not be stuck in one place. And then lastly, I wanted to kind of also highlight this work with our environmental law champions. ADB also works with legal environmental law educators in building their capacity because they're really responsible for the future generations. And we were at a point where we've been doing this program, this technical assistance for a while, but we were at a point where we wanted to do a stock take and really think about, where is the future of environmental law teaching going, and how, what are the factors, the emerging issues that this program could be informed by, and what do we really need environmental law teaching to deliver? And again, we use similar tools. The emerging issues analysis and the futures wheel with the legal educators. And then we also did the scenario analysis with respect to environmental law teaching. And then we came up with a preferred vision for environmental law teaching, which was really effective. And then at the end, all of us, we considered education, regional cooperation, and the multidisciplinary stakeholders. And we came up with a preferred collective vision, which really fed into developing the action plan for our environmental law educators, what more they need to do within their institutions, and as well as the design of the next phase of ADB's developing environmental law champions technical assistance. I think one more, the next step, I think, in our journey in the legal and justice sector, and something that I'm interested in, is really the future prospects and applying this tool, Futures and Foresight, in drafting laws, and drafting laws from the beginning and throughout the legislative process, and then as well as working with parliamentarians, because I think, Susan mentioned that, politicians or maybe parliamentarians maybe kind of focus more on short term, but laws are really about the future and preparing societies for the future. But then they need to be nimble. They need to stay relevant, because what's happening right now is a lot of the laws, they have to constantly get modernized and updated. So I'd like to explore whether future-proofing laws are possible, whether it's desirable. So if anyone has any ideas on this, please feel free to contact me, and I'm really interested in this space. So thank you for your time, and really thanks to Susan and the Futures community for this platform to focus on Futures and Foresight in the justice and legal sector. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Christina. Thank you very much, Samantha, for these stories. Susan, if you want to say something, otherwise we go straight to, for the sake of time, immediately to Ivana. Anything you want?
Thank you. No, thank you, Sam and Christina. I think it would be great if Ivana reflects, because she's really our academician, and kind of reflect on what she has seen in ADB, working with all of us, and where she sees already the seeds of change and the possibilities and opportunities.
Thank you so much. Yesterday, Shakil Ahmed asked us what inspires us. And I have to say that what we have just heard definitely inspires me. And you know, when we travel and go these places and is why are we doing this? You know, so this is, I think, why we are doing it, because the impact of these initiatives is real. It's tangible. It's something that is not just theory. I mean, I'm an academic in the area of all sorts of disciplines, but including future studies. And sometimes people feel theory is here, but theory is always a reflection on the practice, and practice is always informed by theory. There is no practice that is not informed by theory and rethinking our knowledge all the time. We do it all the time. So what I wanted to say is that this jumps very quickly. That's true. I would like to encourage you, if you can, to download this publication if you haven't already, because it's a brilliant resource that covers the methods as well as how those methods have been applied in different countries, in different contexts, on different topics. So as you can see, there are all these examples of Futures through workshops, and that was the publication in 2020. Now, what we are doing is we are updating that, sort of, building on that, documenting last 2 to 3 years of work that ADB has done since that publication. The difference is that the first publication was tools-based, and this one will be operational priorities in ADB-based, so it will be topics-based. And yesterday you were raising some of the issues and questions. How do you integrate this? Maya was talking about culture. We have engineers in the room. We have people who are working in policy, in academia. So future studies and futures thinking is brilliant because it can be integrated in everything we do. And actually we do it all the time. It's just bringing it into the open and doing it more consciously, more structurally, and being more aware of what we are doing actually at the same time. So ADB, as you have heard, has operational priorities. So we are trying to provide examples of these case studies in more detailed way. You've already heard the amazing work that Christina and Samantha have been doing in their areas. So that is documented, and we are hoping to get the publication either December this year or January next year. That I'm going to skip all these slides. These are some of the initiatives we've done on different topics, and this will all be in the publication, so I'm not going to say anything about it because we have no time left. I'm just going to go to my reflections at the end. Oh, this was brilliant as well. You know, we use change progression scenario method, and people actually saw what happens when you don't do futures. You know, what is the most likely outcome if you don't engage in these processes? This was on environmental challenges. So scenario was the earth will burn in no change scenario situation, then going to marginal adaptive change and radical change, which was new earth will be born. This gives people power. And that's my experience, that it gives people some sort of a permission to work towards desired future. Because when we look at our societies and organizations and even our own lives and families, so much of our time is spent doing things that are going to guarantee the future we don't want. And that's simply mind-boggling. Why are we still doing those type of things? Why are we still engaging in processes that we can clearly see are going to have some sort of negative impact on us, are already having a negative impact on all of us? Why is change so difficult? So this gives people, as I said, legitimacy. It gives them inspiration. It summarizes it through metaphor and work and narrative foresight work. It helps people just get very clear about what their collective vision here is. And it is important that that work is participatory, because if it comes top down, there is usually resistance. People need to feel that they own the vision. That is why ADB's participatory futures work is really important. This was a shift from rules for girls to girls rule and counting women to women count. In Indonesia, sleeping giant to awakened giant. These are all the visions that participants came from. And as Suzanne was saying, nearly 500 staff members in ADB already got training in futures thinking and foresight, which is pretty amazing because everybody's then, as Samantha and Christina were saying, taking bits and pieces. And as we heard from Matt Scott yesterday, you know, people are taking the course, and then usually if there's a group of 100, 150 people, at least few will be inspired to take this further. So it's about planting the seeds and then seeing what happens with the soil, sun, and water, which is other people, which is systems, and which is effort we all collectively put in. Now, I just want to say that we are all building on each other's work. So this is what Sherman Cruz has done in Philippines, and ADB has been kind of facilitating the process where lots of people have been involved, various stakeholders. So what are my learnings, you know, Forrest Gump here again, you know, last 7, 8 years, seeing these initiatives grow, seeds being planted, and people actually being very successful. As Matt said yesterday, he just utilized these methods that we kind of exposed him to, and suddenly it worked in an area that I was very surprised that it worked in a very short time frame, 1 hour with 100 people. So that's pretty amazing. And different people bring different energies, and then they actually take it to the next level. My own learning is that leadership and commitment is really critical. We heard from Dr. Diana Chong yesterday how much Brunei Futures Initiative has grown because of her leadership. Dr. Suzanne Roth as well, Samantha Hung and Christina Peck in their own respective areas, and Dr. Suzanne Roth for the whole ADB Bank. So that leadership, enthusiastic leaders who want to make a change, you know, we've seen that with Tan Sri Zul as well in Malaysia. I mean, there's so many people here, I can't really mention everybody. Now, another important thing that ADB has been doing, and I think has been very successful, and in Brunei as well, to test things, to have these pilot projects, to go have a journey in futures, to engage and try it out, and then see which seed is actually going to sprout, because some will not and some will. So being a little bit light about all those things, then engaging in improvisation, meeting people where they're at, doing engagement in the participatory futures. As Dr. Roth said, this is always a collective effort. We can not do much just ourselves. And then it's really important to address these different worldviews and discourses, make visible certain things like those elephants in the room, whether, you know, there is something that we all know it's there, but can't say it. Futures thinking allows us to say that, because there is always a wacky scenario out there. So even if it's uncomfortable, you can just place it in that wacky scenario, and then there is a bit of a distancing, but it's out there, it's in the open. So I think that's a fabulous use of futures, and I've seen all these organizations that have been successful doing it. The last slide, please. I would also like to encourage you, because I've seen people presenting yesterday, and they've been kind of playing with different tools and methods and rejuggling them for their own purpose. Like Emma from United Nations University, she was talking about how they were using futures thinking and actually past, present, future. They were challenging that typology. They were using Manoa scenario method. Some people were using the Son scenario method. This is change progression method that I've shown. So it doesn't really matter which method specifically, as long as that futures thinking and futures literacy is being put out there. Now, if you want to improvise, if you want to be a jazz player, you really need to learn specific instrument really well. So the more access you have to these tools and methods, the more of them you know, the more you learn them and have them in your toolbox, the more successful jazz player you will be in the end. So as I said, that publication is excellent. I'm hoping the publication we are now preparing, by the way, they will be all freely available. The other one you can just download, it's a PDF. The second one will also be freely available. So you can just download them and inform yourself about different ways, different tools and different methods have been used. ADB has been doing that in their context, very hands-on, practical. And obviously there is some sort of a collaboration and humility going on here. And this is my impression of the work being done in the region, that there is that awareness and self-awareness and people's awareness of multiple perspectives and worldviews. I think this is what a multicultural society like Malaysia gives people as well, understanding that there are multiple perspectives on any given issue. We can do that in a structured way where stakeholder positions and worldview positions are part of a method where you link. What I was saying is the problem with lots of organizations that they have a vision. Everybody wants green, clean future, but their strategies are actually not in alignment. That was the case in ADB, and these amazing people have been working to get that vision and strategies in alignment, to say what is it that we do on a daily basis that will give us more chances, higher chance to reach sustainable development goals, to get towards our operational priorities. And obviously the work futurists do is more likely to be plausible and to have that seed growing into a tree or plants or whatever, if it's linked to organizational priorities, if it's linked to what people really need and want, and if it's linked to their daily work, daily job. We go on these retreats where we focus on futures thinking, but then we go back to our daily life and it needs to be connected. All those things need to be connected for them to work. So that is reflections that I came up with just briefly. And I would like to thank everybody for staying here. We are a little bit over time. And definitely thanks Suzanne, Samantha, and Christina. I know how busy you are and all the amazing work you do. So thank you for being here with us. Joost?
Yeah, thank you very much, also our side. I hope you can hear the applause.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day. And we're missing you. I know that you all tried to come here, but for various reasons you couldn't make it. Maybe you can come to APFN 10 and join the community and have talked with us on site. Okay, thank you so much. And I hand over.
And yeah, Joost and everyone, please connect with us either on LinkedIn or via email if you want to collaborate or hear more about our work. For us as the regional knowledge solution provider, as we want to call us, it's really about enhancing influence and ensuring more people think about the future and that we do have intergenerational fairness, as we all want to have more growth, better environments, and healthier people.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And I hand back over to our MC.
Thank you, Joost. And all our panelists. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our next session is a moderated special panel session featuring the latest and highly anticipated publications on futures and foresight. Please welcome on stage our moderator, Crystal Griffiths, and our panelists, Sohail Inayatullah, Zainal Abidin Sanusi, Paresh Chowdhury, and joining us online, Shesh Velamor.
Selamat pagi, good morning all. My name is Crystal Griffiths and I have the pleasure of moderating this session on the latest and highly anticipated books on Futures and Foresight and book launch. I'm joined by I was hoping 4, 3 esteemed guests this morning. Joining us online is Sesh Vellamore, Trustee of Director of Programs at the Foundation for the Future. Sahel Inayatullah, the UNESCO Chair in Future Studies, Anticipation for Sustainability and Wellbeing. Puresh Chowdhury, Futures Researcher and Distinguished Fellow at the Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. Thank you for joining us this morning. So we'll get right into the book launch and anticipated books. And my first question this morning goes to Sesh Vellamore, joining us online from Seattle. Thank you for joining us at 7 p.m. this evening.
Good evening to you all. Can you hear me?
Yes, Sesh Andrew, we can hear you very well.
Okay, and it's good morning to you all. Yes, actually.
So, Sesh, the latest and highly anticipated book from you is The Future, A New Paradigm, Pathways for Averting Collapse. Can you please provide a brief synopsis of your book? And what new insights does this book add to existing futures literature?
That's a big question. Hopefully I have a little time to explain it. Basically, I would start by asking that you all think in terms of perspective, by way of trying to understand the future. By perspective, I define it as something that is a function of distance, meaning when you are trying to observe something and understand, there are different distances from which you are able to see and understand what is going on. As it relates to problems of day to day, you can think in terms of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, or something within a week, or in corporations, they do strategic planning in terms of 5 years and 10 years. The perspective I have chosen to use is what I would describe as the evolutionary perspective, which is multi-generational past, present, and multi-generational future. The way I would ask you to think about and start looking at is to visualize what Carl Sagan put together in his 2-minute video of the pale blue planet. Basically, the idea is that in an evolutionary sense, we have gone through multiple stages as follows. The Big Bang, at least that is the current state of knowledge. Then the particulate, the galactic, the stellar, the planetary, the chemical, the biological, cultural, and finally, the idea that we are in a stage of evolution on the planet as a species, which I would describe as ethical evolution. What that means is to think in terms of what has gone on so far and what needs to change by way of addressing the bigger issues. Now, as it relates to this perspective, again, within the framework of cultural evolution, the concept of memes, that is packets of ideas that interact, is what creates the outcomes that we are dealing with. In this sense, one of the things that I put paid to basically disagree with is the idea that in an evolutionary sense, human agency is of prime importance. I disagree with that notion, and I try to present that in my book, basically to suggest that the future is an emergence out of a complex interplay of multiple parameters. I could name them on multiple axes, essentially the X, the Y, and the Z axis, to outline for you at least 99 different variables that come into play when you're thinking about something that emerges as an outcome. The principles that are in operation as it relates to the creation of such outcomes is what I would call the interaction of complex variables, and basically involving individuals not as the primary agent of change, but as an active walker along with 8.5 other billion human beings on the planet, number one. Number two, an active walker who has a role to play, but because of the complexity cannot determine the outcome. The second point here is as it relates to the notion of self-organization. I don't have the time to go into great detail, but basically what I'm arguing is the process that is taking place as it relates to the emergence of the future is one of self-organization where individuals operating as with multiple identities in a variety of complex systems as participants, inclusive of the biosphere, the geosphere, the atmosphere, space, and so on, are creating outcomes as a result of the interaction by way of local points of convergence that merge with other points of convergence in the neighborhood, and eventually the pile creates an outcome. I wish I could go in greater detail, but unfortunately, time doesn't permit me to do that. When you look at this idea of future as emergence, then maybe we will get a better understanding of what is happening on the planet and how we might address the issues. First of all, as my mentor in so many ways have taught me to think about this, particularly the gentleman on the right on your screen, if he's present, Sohail, is to think of the root causes or the root foundational ideas that have then launched a motion towards activities that create outcomes. What are these foundational ideas? At least insofar as the most recent past is concerned. And when I think about the recent past, I'm thinking about 2000 years. Basically, the idea is that humans are the apex of creation, created in the image of the divine. The second one is that man and nature are separate, and that man has been given nature as dominion to exploit and use towards the idea of progress. Progress which is unlimited, using the scientific method to understand nature and then put it forward, using it towards objectives and ideals, insofar as saying, here is the utopia that I would like. The point I'm trying to make here is, if such utopias could have been possible, given the foundational ideas, we would have, as humans, as a civilization, would have arrived at these utopias a long time ago. But the fact of the matter is, we have not. As actually, we have created mega crises on the planet as a result of making operational these foundational ideas that run counter, actually, to almost everything, in fact, is opposite. Let me give you an idea, some of the mega crises. You already know that, but then we are, it's important that we understand. Climate change is now at the forefront. I would like to point out that climate change is a symptom. The root cause goes back to the idea that we can exploit nature towards the idea of some notion of progress. How is progress measured? GDP. How is GDP measured? GDP is the sum total of the monetary value of all transactions in an economy. Well, let's think about that, for instance. Let's assume that we are cleaning up nuclear waste in some part of the world, or dumping garbage into the oceans by the millions of tons, or creating carbon dioxide parts per million in the atmosphere. The point of it is that every activity that went into the creation of these particular issues is added to the GDP. Think about that for a minute. Or for that matter, if there is rampant crime in a society, the idea of creating more efficient justice systems, larger police forces, armed militias, and so on to control crime is, in terms of economic activity, added to the GDP. Or for that matter, if you're trying to clear the Brazilian rainforest to produce ethanol, the damage done to the environment over the long term And in terms of remediation, is going to involve all kinds of investment. But the activity that is involved in creating and producing ethanol is added to the GDP. So should some of these activities actually be looked at as a net negative and subtracted from the GDP? That's the point I'm trying to make, is to say that the assumption that GDP is a measure of progress is very badly mistaken and wrong, in my view. Whereas people like Hazel Henderson have created ideas that require us to look at metrics that measure actual well-being of humans on a planet. Anyway, I can go into it into greater detail, but again, time limitation prevent me from doing that. The next thing to look at is what are the major transitions that are taking place on the planet, and I have kind of included that in my book. I will quickly outline them. The first one is the notion of nation state as an obsolete idea, because we have been overtaken in terms of globalization. So I would ask you as a challenge to name me a single problem that we are all as a species addressing on the planet that can be resolved, solved, or taken care of within the framework of the nation state. I can tell you that you cannot come up with a single instance where problems can be resolved within the nation state. Actually, what is obvious is our attempts to address these issues have gone beyond the nation state in terms of supranational entities that I could name at least 25 of them that are grappling with issues, whether it is in the political sphere or the economic sphere or the social sphere or the cultural sphere, each struggling to come up with solutions. And unfortunately, we have not been able to do that. And that's primarily because, one, as individuals, we have been conditioned over our evolution to think in terms of our identities at multiple levels. And now we have identified ourselves as citizens of a country, whereas every issue that we confront in terms of trying to resolve them requires us to think as global citizens. Okay? So that's one of the big issues. The second transition is in terms of human progress over several millennia, we can think in terms of faith versus knowledge.
I think this
We can argue about what constitutes knowledge, and we can argue about what constitutes faith, but basically in very general terms, what we can say with some certainty is that as it relates to ourselves, as it relates to the world around us, we know much more than we did yesterday, and we will know more tomorrow. That doesn't mean to say that we have achieved the pinnacle of knowing everything about everything, far from it. But the fact of the matter is, the original assumptions of most of the faith systems in the world haven't changed in 2000 years. But basically, the idea that knowledge as we accumulate is slowly eroding the notion of faith. And we can see it in front of our eyes almost every day, where the biggest issues on the planet is the lunging towards or reverting back to faith systems, even though confronted with knowledge that clearly nullifies the very notions that we started out within the faith system. For instance, very simply put, it wasn't long ago that we thought that the earth was flat. I can give you lots and lots of examples along those lines. The second point, as it relates to faith and knowledge, is the idea of...
Can you hear me?
Pardon me?
Thank you. We've obviously got a lot more to cover in your book. And
Yes.
so my last question for you, because I think we can't cover everything that you have in your book this morning, but where
Yes.
can we find your book so that we can get into this into more detail?
The book can be found on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. I think if anybody, and it's available hard copy. I can show it to you if you're able to look at it. See, right here. That's what it looks like.
Thank
And
you.
it can be purchased. I am I'm hopeful that it will evoke enough
Round of
interest
applause
in you
over
to want
here.
to buy it.
Thank you. So moving on to our next panelist, Sahel, your book, CLA 3.0, 30 Years of Transformative Research, I know is available on the table outside, and people in the room are already owners of a copy. You have a lot of wisdom to share in this 30 years of research. What can we all be looking forward to in reading and learning from your book?
Just tell me how many minutes I have.
Huh? We're going good. We've got 14 minutes between the three of you.
Okay, so 4 minutes.
That would be great.
CLA Reader came out 2004, and it was based on the first CLA article. I remember finishing it and sending it to a Journal of Technological Forecasting and Social Change. And the reviewers got it and says this is one of the stupidest things we've ever read. Please don't email us back. And I said,
Can you
"Why?"
speak up, Sohail, please?
You can't hear. You can't hear? Who can't hear? Sorry, Sesh, everyone else can hear it.
Yeah, it's good. Much better now.
So I emailed back, and then the response was they couldn't figure out why you would integrate data with systemic change, with culture and narrative. It really didn't make sense to them. So for me, it was actually trying to think, originally we had unified knowledge, right? If you go back to the pre-scientific revolution, it was all unified. And then during the scientific industrial revolution, knowledge became separate in terms of politics, science, humanities, philosophy, etc. And this was an attempt, how do you unify knowledge, but as a simple method? But that was essentially the CLA Reader. And that was 600 pages. And it was very much theory driven, because I would get requests from PhD students everywhere saying, I want to use this, but my supervisor, the entire examination team thinks it's nutty. It doesn't make any sense. So with that book, then we went to CLA 2.0, co-edited with Ivana, and many of you are writers in that, Marcus Anthony, etc. And that was really to collect case studies. So detractors think this is nutty. It doesn't make sense. Why would you do this? Let's see if it works. So I think in about 30, 40 countries with at least 100 organizations, we experimented. And that became CLA 2.0. And then recently, and after CLA 2.0 was also 600 pages, I vowed never to do a CLA book again. Because whatever the results, everyone hates each other at the end of it. And then CLA 3.0 came out. And that was not just responding to the detractors 30 years ago, but saying, now let's apply it in novel areas. And so the type of groups using it, it's a core methodology for Interpol, for FAO, for ADB, for about 40, 50 other countries. And it's gone from something that doesn't make sense to what I gained from people using it. This helps us clarify to understand what the world today looks like. And it helps us move towards a different world. Now, for those of us, if you're hanging out in a CLA environment, it can be challenging. When my son, I think, was 2 years old, I thought, well, how do I teach him CLA? I thought, if it's really working, a 2-year-old should be able to understand it. And so he asked me, he had a pen, and he said, what is this? And I said, okay, that's a litany data question. So I came back with, well, let me switch the system and the worldview. I said, the pen could be to write, it could be jewelry, and I put it on my head, it could be a hat, meaning reality is constructed socially and historically, as said through evolution. And then, of course, my partner, we'll call her Gaia Gump, not Forrest Gump. She said, don't you do this again. In any case, the next morning he woke up and walked into the bedroom and had his pati on his head. And I thought, this is interesting. And he said, Dad. I go, yes, sweetie. He goes, hat. And so I immediately understood, he understood the social construct of reality and how to deconstruct and then reconstruct as a preferred future. And also the result is 20 years later, he's very technical specific and hates depth stuff in a way. It's too much for him. So you have to find your own way to use this. Find your entry point to CLA, find what works. And I think the challenge for all of us is to not get stuck at any level. Go deep in story as appropriate, change the litany as Sesh just said, go from GDP to, as Shaquille now wants us to go to gross inspiration, to actually move the latent litany and find a new story for it. So CLA 3.0 is there. Many of you are authors in it. And I think, unfortunately, it's another 600 pages. Again, we promised not to do another CLA book. Unfortunately, CLA 4.0 will be coming out soon. Thanks so much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sahal. So look forward to reading 3.1 so you can see what's going into 4.0. Thank you. Our next speaker is Zanal Sanusi, who's the coordinator of the Secretariat of the UNESCO Chair in Future Studies, Anticipation for Sustainability and Wellbeing. I have a copy of your book here. It's called A Virtual Journey into International Islamic University in Malaysia for 2040. I have two questions for you. Who needs to read your book, and what does IIUM look like in 2040?
All right, quickly, a caveat is I'm not the author. Yeah, we just a collections of writing, several people led by a lead editor, Zurina. But I took the liberty of like sharing the process of writing up and translating what Suhail has been working with us. Yeah. The question is who okay, right. It's for the university people who would like to do change in the university using future scenarios building and foresight exercise as an exercise, as a tool to design the change, to develop the framework, moving from what to what, and also, if you don't do that change, what would be the scenarios? So if you look at the table of content, I mean, as usual, you can see from the ADB session that the usual practice you develop from no change until the radical change. So we did that, and it's clearly helped those who like to know or like to realize that if you don't do this, what would be the university like? So if I can share the four scenarios, yeah, which is quite interesting, and usually Suhail would ask us to come up with a catchy word for that. The no change scenarios in IIUM, we talked about if you don't do change, what will happen to the university is the museum of yesterday. So that is perfectly illustrate that, yeah, people will come, but looking at the old thing, knowledge that we may have not obsolete already, right? The marginal change scenarios would be McDonaldizations of IIUM. So something of a la carte. You can order what you want quickly, and system one. Yeah. The third scenario is adaptive change scenarios, viraling knowledge in 2040, meaning that you are adapting the change that is happening, ChatGPT, AI, and those kind of things, trying to make use of that. The radical change would be becoming the oasis of knowledge. So that will answer the second question: what will be your AB? But I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to do this because the rector is saying, yeah? What he said that he presented yesterday, that's the kind of university that we want. Is an oasis of knowledge, whereby it become freedom, and one feature that I remember well is university works on the basis of wakaf. Everyone donates, like what Cairo, Al-Azhar University is. Other than that, the books is good if you are university people, if you're university leaders and management. And I would like to share that it helps a lot in two things. One, of course, this is the output. But what I admire most, well, is that the process that is happening that helps us a lot. because it's not easy to do change. Everyone knows that. That's very cliche. But with this exercise, with the future scenarios, with the CLA that we do, and we can use other tools as well. But 40 of us, it takes 3 days for us, intensive 9 to 5, to undergo the process of change, understand what is change, what is not changes, scenarios, and we come up with this. So I would conclude by saying that if you are in university industry sector and would like to do change and would like to relate futures thinking, futures literacy, literature scenarios kind of thing, this is a book that may help you to give guideline. Thank you.
Thank you. I also had a quick flip through, and I think it's relevant to all futures practitioners. I look forward to reading it. Thank you. Our next speaker is Puresh Chowdhury, our last speaker for the session. Puresh won the award last night for her article, The Incredible Awakening Experiments in Futures in Pakistan, which is published in the Journal of Futures Studies. Puresh, we've been all waiting patiently last night and this morning to hear what your article is about. Can you share with us that with us now?
Thanks, Crystal. Thank you everyone for patiently waiting and listening to all of us. So the article in general, 10 years ago, I was exposed to what Futures World is all about. So a lot of practice went into what the foresight methods and techniques were. The paper that I did for the journal, it was quite a task, and the reflections within that were basically the integration of the self in the work that I did. And that in itself was a challenging proposition. How do you really connect the dots in the work that you're doing with the self that is evolving, as like Sesh had mentioned? One of the elements that I do really, in some sense, touch upon is what Suzanne pointed out in that whole circuit of hers, is the level of self-awareness. So it takes a fair degree of self-awareness to be able to doing the work that we actually do. And especially if you're in a very challenging environment like that of Pakistan, it's really not easy to push the futures thinking in the public policy space. So the research article really gives you an insight as to how that was made possible, having very incremental steps, but really focus on the prize was the shift in discourse. So being part of the media community in the country, one of the essential learning was like how much of our analysis in the public space was really past oriented. This is what had happened. And very less focus was on the language where what could be possible. So the research work that has happened in the last 10 years, I wouldn't say it really massively pushed the discourse, but we have really shifted from becoming really past-centric in our conversation in the language that we use, and really future-oriented, at least in the events, in the conversation that you see in broadcast media. So I'm not saying that was only the impact of the work that we did, but it has been for people like Suhail and Dr. Ivana, who have really helped us through. So the research publication that were actually produced in the process included, with Suhail, we did Karachi Futures. It is one of the largest metropolitans in the city with over 22 million population. We did State of Future Index for the country, 2 edition, 2 publication, in which we pulled together a lot of public policy stakeholders, the media, the military, the intelligence, the think tank in the country in order to move that needle forward. So in a nutshell, that's what the article discusses, and a reflection of what the last 10 years looked like.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to say we're still on time. So that was my last question for our panelist this morning, but also to say we look forward in anticipation of more publications from our esteemed guests and also from those of you in the room. Also, just to promote that there are some other books outside. We've got Imagining Post-COVID Education Futures from Imitaz Ahmed and others. So thank you very much.
Wait, how about the new book by the Pacific? You're not pushing your new book. That's unfair.
We can do that over morning tea. So thank you, terima kasih.
Thank you, Crystal, and all panelists. We will now have a short 15-minute coffee break to refresh ourselves. Please use this time to grab a beverage, stretch your legs, and network with your fellow attendees. And we also kindly request your prompt return as we will resume our program at precisely 10:45. Thank you. Yours?
And buy books and T-shirts.
Thank you all very much for listening to me. Bye.